much of the essential wit of what was possibly 2001's most iconic film, Shrek, is captured by a moment when Fiona, upholding the pretense of fairy tale gallantry, refers to Donkey as Shrek's noble steed. Of course, the juxtaposition between what she calls them and who Shrek and Donkey really are provokes outrageous laughter from the protagonists. And it actually provoked outrageous laughter from all of the people who were watching the movie with me the first time I saw it. And if I remember correctly, I laughed at it too. The irony was that strong and that obvious. And maybe that's why that line has stuck with me for so long. Interestingly enough, I've started to wonder of late if it's not a reference to Don Quixote. Now, this might sound like a bit of a stretch, but if we cast our minds back to the first chapter of Miguel de Cervantes' magnum opus, we find an irony so similar that it invites comparison. You see, at this point, Don Quixote, who is still Alonso Quijano, has decided that he will embark upon an adventure to revive chivalry in early modern Spain. And to do so, he needs to find his own noble steed. He searches for his horse and finds one in the stable, an old, emaciated horse that he decides to name Rocinante. Now, according to many Don Quixote scholars, Rocinante is in fact a pun. It's a compound word constituted by two elements. Rocín, which refers to a humble workhorse, and ante might indicate before, like the Spanish adjective antes. So, taking these two into account, Rocinante can sort of be roughly translated as once a workhorse. Of course, Cervantes' joke here is that between the frail, emaciated Rocinante and the idealized gallant horses of chivalric romance, there's a farcically enormous gap. In fact, though, interestingly, this isn't the first time that we see the noun rocín in the very first chapter of Don Quixote. The opening lines famously refer to a rocín flajo y galgo corredor. Rocín, you see, is quite an interesting word because it doesn't seem to have a very clear origin in Latin. In fact, it's quite difficult to trace it back anywhere before medieval usage in any of the Romance languages. There did exist this medieval Latin noun, runcinus or runcinus, depending on how it would have been pronounced at the time, and that might be related to the Old High German Ross, which meant something like horse, and might even be cognate with the Old French ronzan. I'm assuming that that's how it's pronounced. I made sure to work on my alveolar tap there and keep the sibilant sound as I understand it was pronounced in Old French, but let me know in the comments below if you've got any corrections for that there. Given the frustratingly inconclusive nature of this etymology of Rocinante, I thought I'd add something to make up a little bit here, and that's that there's actually a species of horse named after Rocinante. To be more accurate, in the 1920s, Hipparion, a genus of equine, was discovered in Spain and by its discoverer named Hipparion rocinantis. So Rocinante has both a genus of equine and a famous anime character named after him. But why stop there if we're talking about famous horses in Spanish literature? Because if Shrek's donkey might be a reference to Rocinante, or possibly actually a reference to Sancho's noble steed Rufio, Rocinante himself is probably a reference to an older work. And of course, what I'm talking about here is El Cid. Now, I don't have any conclusive proof for this. After all, noble steeds are a commonplace in chivalric romance, the genre that, in part, Miguel de Cervantes is satirizing in his novel. Alexander had Bucephalus, Sir Gawain, the Green Knight, had his own Gringolot, Orlando, both when he was furioso and slightly more calm, had Brilladoro. However, even with that caveat, I don't think it would have been lost on the original readers of Don Quixote that this scene of discovering and naming Rocinante is remarkably similar to the backstory of El Cid's horse, Babieca. There are many different versions of how El Cid came to find and name Babieca, but the one that I've come across most is that he was offered a horse by his godfather, Pedro el Grande, who I think was either a Cistercian or a Carthusian monk. I can't remember exactly, I think Cistercian. And young Ruy Diaz de Vivar, surveying the various horses that were on display, deliberately chose apparently the weakest horse, provoking his godfather to say Babieca, meaning something like fool, saying that El Cid was foolish for choosing the weakest looking horse. But that adjective, Babieca, combines two morphemes. First, there's the diminutive suffix ca, which still appeared in early modern Spanish. We see it in cases where instead of saying bonito or bonita, early modern Spanish writers would have said something like bonico or bonica. And the second morpheme would be babo or baba, which might have originated from the Latin balba or balbus, which has given us modern Spanish words like bobo, as in... There is a verb associated with this in Spanish. The verb embaucar, which today means to trick someone, had an older version, embabucar, which literally meant to make a fool of someone, from whence it gained its modern meaning. We could still talk a little bit more about the linguistics of horses in Spanish, such as how the modern caballo comes from the Latin caballum, which meant simply a pack horse, as opposed to the Latin equus, referring to a steed, perhaps even a noble one. But I want to leave it at that, because it's come to my attention today that I need to say thank you to everyone. We've just reached 5,000 subscribers on our channel. And if you've ever watched our videos, liked them, shared them, or commented, thank you very much for helping us grow to this point. I'm very, very grateful for all the assistance. I'd also like to make an announcement. Some of you who've been following us for a long time will know that we started out by covering Don Quixote chapter to chapter. And I've decided to start a new project to continue that book project. We have a second channel now. It's called Arte Nuevo. You'll find it on our homepage and also in the link in the description here. From the beginning, I've always been interested in not just looking at the pure linguistics of the Romance languages, but also looking at the literature and the history associated with them, and also associated with other languages from other language families. I would love one day to cover Guzmán de Alfarache in depth. I've been reading it of late, and it's really, really interesting how foundational it's been in a lot of modern literature. Other great works that I would love to cover at some point are obviously Dante Alighieri's Divina Commedia and Boccaccio's Decameron. But all that in time. For now, I will point you towards that channel if you're interested in the supplementary project we have going on. And I will say thank you very much for watching this video, and I hope to see you in the next one. Adios.